We are lighting the candle, a world that works, and I am Bill Correll. I am here with one of my best friends in the world, Jeremias. And see, you don't actually even have to feel that way yourself. This is my gift to you. Whenever I see Jan, it always brings a smile to my face, and she's just a font of this wonderful knowledge. And I really want to bring to your attention the LinkedIn post that she has about communicating with your pets, about their health, and it's marvelous. And
Oh,
I'd like to spend a moment or two, if you don't mind. I want to toot your horn for a second or two. Um, how long have you been doing this kind of work with healing work with animals?
um, probably. That I actually want to say recognized that that's what I was doing, or that it wasn't, was probably about 15 years.
Okay.
I think I always was very attuned to animals, always, and
Yep.
had these very interesting experiences where, like I had a cat growing up, and I remember I would have these like kind of flashes that like something had happened to him and then he would come home injured.
Yeah.
And things like that, where I had really strong intuitive abilities and connections to the animals I had. But I
Yeah.
don't think I ever talked about it with anybody, because as a child, I thought they're going to think I'm crazy, or they're going to like whatever. It's like I wasn't sure what everybody in my family and everything would think. So I never
Sure.
really chatted about it. And then it was many years later when I realized I should probably listen to those messages.
Well, and I completely understand what you're saying, because the conventional wisdom is that we're the sentient ones. And quite frankly, I don't think that that's really fair to the animals, because whether it's a dog or a cat or a horse or another mammal, and there's even an argument that some people, get really good responses out of invertebrates as well. So what it comes down to is being open to the possibility that there's new language that you and I can learn as human beings. And when we do that, the world kind of opens up, because I personally have shared thoughts with several of my cats over the last 40 years.
Well, it was interesting because I was talking to a friend of mine, my friend Joe, who's a professor at Harvard, and she said she had met somebody really recently who I guess works with elephants and elephant communication,
Yep.
and that elephants have the ability to communicate with each other. They actually have names for each other. Like all these different things. And we were talking about it, and she's like, he was such an interesting guy. And that's like his specialty is, like his research. I don't know where he works or whatever, but that's like it was an academic person, I think. I think he worked in academia, and that's like his specialty is like elephants and the way they communicate. And I was just like, I think I don't know. I think there are a lot of people, humans, who walk around in the world thinking that we're so advanced and that we have this, and we are, and we have this ability to communicate, far like in certain ways, but there's a lot of communication which we have lost, let's just say, because I think it's still there, but I think you just have to be willing to find it.
I agree with you. And I think that there's a lot of pseudoscience that's masquerading as knowledge, and it really isn't. It's more or less where people have shut down asking questions, or no longer thinking like a scientist. They're thinking like somebody who is an acknowledged expert in a field. Do you know what I mean? Where if they don't know about it, then it doesn't exist. And
Mhm.
anything else that is beyond what they're able to, create in their own language is probably made up in nonsense. And there's probably nothing better than the crackpot that just keeps going when 97% of the other scientific community says you're not making any sense to us. And a guy like Einstein would just say something like, well, that's because you're not speaking the same language that I am.
Uh, that's right. Or, I always say it's not that it's not, let's say, certain things haven't happened or certain things aren't true as far as like, let's say, healing and, my understanding of them and what's happening. It's just that it hasn't been, if it's has not been scientifically shown yet, it's just that we haven't figured out a way to measure it or we haven't found a way to identify it yet. It's happening. It's just that it's beyond our technological skills at the moment to
Right.
explain it. And then I was coming from a scientist or somebody who always looked for data and reasons. I think I have friends and even friends that are scientists that have a hard time with that.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I don't know. I really strongly believe that. I just because I see it all the time where things that I didn't understand, and all of a sudden there'll be a study, and the study shows that why it's happening, and I don't need those reasons anymore.
Right.
I don't need it anymore because I've seen it happen, and I've seen it change. People or animals and the way they feel.
I love what you're saying, and it kind of brings to mind that where I think the scientific curiosity that got us to where we are right now shuts down in a lot of instances is that having to have the why before you can validate the what really keeps things the way that they are. And we, for all intents and purposes, in many areas, we're still living on a flat earth.
Right.
Uh,
And that I think in regards to human function and the human body and the capabilities of healing,
right.
I think in that way we are. Uh, we were talking about that because I met somebody recently who was talking about somebody who was diagnosed with something like, I don't know, it was like stage 4 ovarian cancer. Like it wasn't great, and decided not to do traditional treatment, and went off and thought, just did, all these healing modalities, meditated like hours a day, that's a whatever, and then recovered. And I never think those, like, yes, could, but I don't think there's too many instances I've heard of situations like that where I don't think it's kind of like a fluke. I
Yeah.
don't think we understand the power of the human body to actually heal itself. The power that we have in our in our mindset and our psyche, and what how on some sort of subconscious level, what we're doing and how that influences.
Yeah.
I, don't- I think that's just like you said. That's a flat Earth, versus in the realm of explanation and scientific proof.
Well, yeah, and you can carry that over, into language as well. If you stop and think about the documented vocabularies of whales and dolphins and that sort of thing, I don't think there's enough people that have been exposed to that work and who really understand that when you give an animal a habit, we talk about what used to be called tricks being a behavior. Like you train someone to replicate a behavior, and then you give them the reward. And like Pavlov's dog, funny enough, if they want the reward, they do the behavior, right? And then you give them a hand sign to go along with the behavior. But guess what? It's communication, guys. That's all life is. We're speaking this language where we are right now by accident. If we were located 1,000 miles from here, we'd be using different words.
Mhm.
So, it's kind of a neat thing if we can give ourselves credit for both being able to interpret and as well as generate new language, because that's what we do all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think and I think that so much of it becomes beyond like verbal communication, which is what I speak to in that article I wrote. It becomes, and that energetic communication, the fact that, if I'm in a space and I actually um share something with you, whether that be communication, it our brain waves start to match, and our heart rhythms start to match.
Yes.
So there is this communication that's happening, and this resonance, this similar, this equality, this resonance that occurs. And with animals, I think that it definitely happens. You'll see it happen, and it's beyond like looking for sure signs that you know of communication by body language and, body language, eye contact, so vocal sounds, things like that. It's beyond that. It's something that happens energetically, which, could be big. I think we discount smell. I mean, smell is one of the most powerful senses, and animals use smell a lot to navigate their world. I mean, that's how they, between the smell of fear or the smell of just their ability to go into a space or to go outside. And, as I always, they're getting memos by smell, it's like, I'm like, he's getting his, Tonka walks and sniffs like 1,000 sniffs, they can't walk like, an inch before he's like, kind of like deciphered those 4 blades of grass, like
Information overload, and you haven't even got up the front step yet, right?
exactly. But there's so much to that, and so much we as human beings miss out on because we don't pay attention to those messages or cues, or we're not one with our environment like, animals are.
Yeah. So I'm gonna like pretend like I know what I'm talking about for a second, but this is a really powerful quote that I have no idea who to attribute it to. And it was I believe it wasn't Helen Keller. It was someone who was just blind, who, somebody said, I feel so badly for you, that you can't see. And he said, well, on the contrary, it's I who feel badly for you because you can't hear or smell or taste or touch the way that I do.
Hmm.
So it's one of those things that when you embrace the tools you've got, all things are possible. There's really nothing in the world that you cannot do with a little bit of inspiration and perspiration and maybe sometimes desperation.
No, absolutely. I think that that's a really great way to put it. A little bit of desperation and whatnot. But it really is true, though, how much, how narrow are we in our observational skills of, and I think it was Ken, our friend Ken, who once
Yep.
said, basically, he said one day that when he goes to a meeting, he takes a moment before the meeting when he gets out of his car, it happens to be outside, and kind of takes a look around of where he is. And something that simple of like, oh, where am I? What's my
Yep.
environment? What can I notice here?
Yeah.
And
It's a good habit to be present. It really is.
to be
And when you
present,
get,
to take in your surroundings when you talk about like just taking in your environmental cues.
and a lot of times the environment that you're having the communication in is going to drastically affect the quality of that communication, both in kind and magnitude. For instance, if it's pouring rain and you're trying to talk to somebody, it's likely most of your attention is not going on to the conversation at all. It's like, how quickly can I get away from this and get myself dry, or something of that nature.
Right, right. And as we were talking about like environment and just knowing where you are and the places you're in, and also like doing the same thing if you happen to be on Zoom or on another platform. It's like taking a moment between and just saying, okay,
Yep.
you know, what, that check in. But I feel like we navigate the world so unconsciously that, that we don't really take the time to communicate or to listen, to actually cultivate those aspects. I mean, we are multi like sensory beings. And how much time do we spend on the other senses?
Well, and here's the neat thing. Um, in verbal language, we have things like similes and metaphors. You know what I mean? But what if there are also similes and metaphors, or that kind of an approximation of what you're experiencing vision wise? And how would you communicate that? You your hands get all kind of tied up when you're trying to describe a sunset to somebody, or what it
Mhm.
feels like, to be standing in the middle of the glacier fields of Alaska, or on the side of a volcano in Hawaii. It's like we don't have the language for that.
No, no, and I think there's something about yeah, and there's something experiential about those things too. Like I remember standing on a volcano in Hawaii, um, and feeling the heat come up through your shoes, like on the hardened lava, which wasn't, hot. They don't let you go near the hot parts, when you're in Hawaii. When I went to Volcanoes National Park, but you're standing, I don't know, they have, I mean, you can see where the lava is oozing, and you're standing on hardened lava where it actually was molten maybe a few weeks or, earlier. And like it's so hot on the bottoms of your feet through your shoes that you actually can't, like, you have to actually shuffle. Like there's that warmth. And then there's the visual aspect of it, like, that kind of almost moon landing kind of um look to everything. And there's something about experiencing that and then trying to describe it versus talking about being at at the base of a volcano or whatever, or just seeing a volcano on TV and it literally being flat. Flat in more ways than one.
I have been on several volcanoes, but they tell me they're all dormant.
Right, 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 right. Exactly, exactly.
The other kind of thing that comes to mind is what's it like to see blue ice, on a glacier, where you've got these holes in the surface of the ice, and it pitches down, and the ice is so dense that it will not allow any colored uh, wavelengths to escape from it, except for the blue ones, which is very, very cool.
Yeah.
And as you're talking about being careful on a volcano, you have to do that on a glacier too. As we were standing on a glacier, our helicopter pilot said something like, "Well, if you go down one of those holes there, you'll end up about 2.5, 3 miles down to the river, or down to the ocean." And we would go, "Well, okay, will you please stop dancing around the edge of that? Because if one of us falls down, it's going to be a tragedy. But if you fall down, we're going to be stuck up here on this ice."
On this ice. Yeah, I've been on a few when I was in the Northern Cascades, and we were on a glacier, and it's pretty spectacular. And the colors are like, whether that it was there were blues and then there were greens, but it's pretty remarkable because when you look around.
Yeah. So I want to kind of tease out, the metaphors of the other senses for a minute. And another one that I would say, that feeling that you get when you're doing yoga in a group, when you can actually feel the energy from all the other people that are in the room,
Mm-hmm.
and you look around and you kind of know what the look on their face is going to be before you actually see it, because you can sense it. I mean, that's the same thing in meetings sometimes with people, or it's the same thing being with small children. And again, back with animals, where you know what the animal is getting at before you actually determine it experientially.
Mm-hmm.
So my last two cats that I had were so well connected. Didn't even have to say words. All I had to do was just look in a direction. And yes, I do miss them. They were both good boys. Old men, actually.
Yeah, there's yeah, I think it does happen. And I think that you can I used to always say that it was always bizarre. Like I would go and I would teach, and I would then go take, there are 108 yoga poses altogether or whatever. And yeah, some of them are very advanced. I never got to do, but that's okay. But I would do something that was very uncommon. Like I hadn't done in a class that I taught in probably months and months and months. And I would go take classes with other teachers, and all of a sudden, we would all do that pose. And it would be the most bizarre things. I used to think, is there that memo that went out somewhere, like that internal email or a memo that goes out saying, okay, we're all doing this pose now. And we hadn't communicated it and we hadn't talked about it. It was just something either energetic or something beyond what was, even in a conscious, in somewhat conscious level. It was like I'd wake up and go, I haven't done that pose in a really long time, and I think I should do that pose today.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, I would go, and one of my teachers would do that pose that week, and then another teacher would do that pose that week, and I'd be like, "Wow, that's so strange." No, I mean, I knew it wasn't an accident, but I always like looked at it as being so interesting.
There's a concept called the hundredth monkey. I don't know if you've ever heard that,
So,
expressed before. Essentially, what it is that when a certain number of times something's been tried, that given any population with the same problem to be solved, somewhere around the 100th attempt, there will be a solution. And that solution would be knowable and find outable by any population dealing with the same problem. So they talk about the 100th monkey who figures out how to get the breadfruit out of the tree and onto the ground without damaging it, or being able to climb to the top of some tree to outwit some predator or what have you, or just finding a new part of the island that nobody's ever been to before and setting up home there. So the 100th monkey is a way to also, it's a good metaphor for talking about scientific breakthroughs, or that point where people who are of a similar mindset and a similar skill set all suddenly seem to be resonating with yoga poses,
mhm,
or something
right.
else.
Or something else, and I think animals are the same way. And I do think that you talk about communicating with your cats. And when my mom was up for 2 months, I mean, I tell Tonka to do something, and she said, like, it's unbelievable. He knows exactly what you're saying. Like, he does exactly what you say. It's like, she's like, it's like, oh, we're like, okay, Tonk, get on the sofa. And he goes over to the sofa and he jumps up, and she's like, like, and it's just, and some of it is, obviously spending so much time with another being. I think partners see it, like I think you and Jan see it, in your relationship, and you talk about your communication about kind of thing. But I think there is something, spending so much time with a being, with whether it be an animal or a person or something, that you begin to feel and resonate where you're at, where your communication level becomes beyond verbal, and it does encompass all the different senses. And I think people get that when they go into nature and they actually feel their surroundings a little bit more, maybe in the quiet of, like, they, people sense the trees and and the wind, and just becomes, you become much more environmentally, or just conscious of your like physical surroundings.
Right.
um
I think you said something very powerful, and that is that, like anything, if you have a skill and you're not using it frequently, or there's another skill that interferes with the quality of your experience of that skill, like the nonverbal knowing what we were going to do before we did it. My dear wife and I used to spend too many waking hours together. I mean, like literally more than two people should ever do. And how we managed to work it out and stay together, is because there was this multi-layer, multi-level kind of experience of each other going on. But what I've also found is, especially since COVID and especially since she's out of the house, it takes a little more work to get on the same plane. You know, it's not like automatic like it used to be. And so that can be troubling to me sometimes. And when I take the time, again, we develop that by spending the time to get to know each other well enough and to have the communications be ratified and codified, if you will. And what I mean by that is that where there was less room to misinterpret something and take the conversation away from where the partner wants it to go. Um, so rather than correcting each other, sometimes it's just a, it's like, okay, yeah, tell me more about that, Oh, yeah. So what was that like for you? And how did that go? And sometimes it's just the content of the conversation shifts to whatever that person is spending most of their waking hours doing. They want to
Mhm.
share it. They want to complete it in some cases. And
Yeah,
that's a
I
commitment.
yeah, and I love what you're saying, Bill, because one of the things you said was like the amount of time. And I think that that's what you had like kind of gotten from what I was saying is the amount of time. And I think
Yep.
that we, when I think about cultivating like skills of, of that nonverbal communication or that nonverbal dialogue, and that first of all begins with ourselves, and that's what I talk about in the article a lot is like, can we get quiet, and that quietness. And I think we have to learn how to communicate with ourselves and listen to those cues within ourselves, and that makes it easier to listen with other people. I think it makes it's double edged. Like I think it's like not double edged exactly, but it's double benefit. And I don't think if we take that time within ourselves with them, then it doesn't really resonate, doesn't really work. But it is a practiced skill. It is like, and you said one thing that I absolutely love. You were talking about we have other maybe skills that kind of take over first. And
Right.
I was using this, I was describing it this way physically to one of my students the other day, my yoga students. I said, because what happens in the body, for example, if your right side, let's say your right side is more flexible than your left, and your right leg, if you were to like lay on your back and let your legs open wide to a V, your right leg opens further to the ground than your left leg does. And I said, if you want to get your left leg to go down further, I said, what you need to do is bring in your right side first and then let your left side go out. Let's say that's the tighter side or the weaker side. Let that give that an opportunity to kind of explore first before you bring in your more powerful side or the more flexible side. Because what ends up happening is it takes over. So if I have a strong, if let's say I'm doing a pose that's arm weight bearing and my right arm is stronger than my left, I tend to take a lot of pressure on my right side. And
Yep.
my left side never gets recruited really. Like it participates, but never fully. Partly knowing, let's say, oh, well, her right's going to take over. So why should I bother working so hard? Like it's not dumb. And then partly also because it never has the opportunity because the right side says, okay, I'll do it. I'll do it. But if I can kind of decrease the pressure on my right side and let my left side actually engage a little bit, like have to participate, the left's going to get stronger and it's going to actually feel more balanced because my right side is so used to doing all that work. And so I think what happens with our skills or our what we might label as our strengths, like let's say we're a really good verbal communicator, or let's say we're very analytical, like I'm thinking of myself, like I'm really brainy. Yes, is it easy for my brain to kind of try to look for reasons and look for explanations and go into my thinking mind when I'm sitting there trying to solve a problem? Yes, it's really easy, but it's not necessarily, or most of the time, it's not what I need to do. I need to turn off my brain and say, okay, one, like for me, what is your heart telling you to do? Like in this situation, what are your senses telling you to do? What is your heart telling you to do? And then kind of shutting off the thing that's so powerful that it would make all the decisions if it could, you know?
Yeah, I really love what you're saying, and it just kind of reinforces to me, speaking for myself, because I consider myself to be smarter than the average bear, which is at my own peril. It means usually when I am, doping things out and coming up with a reason for it, I get an answer. And that answer usually shuts down any further inquiry in that particular area.
Mhm.
I'm on to bigger and better things. And quite frankly, I love it more when the questioning and the curiosity is like play. It's not serious and not. Well, I'll give you an example. I've got something going on with the IRS right at the moment, and normally that would inspire fear, right in the middle of your chest. But the woman who was assigned to what we're working on, she laughed all through the whole conversation, which was like, first of all, it was kind of weird. And then it was like, okay, I'll get on that page. And I was joking with her, and she's joking back with me. And it's like, letting me know what the next step is. And she said, if you're not hearing anything, there's nothing to hear.
Well, and I think that that's really a lot of time, like, it's how much do we listen to, and how much do we actually listen to ourselves in those types of situations? So I had a health issue recently, which wasn't anything astronomical. I got some, I'm always, but I got something back from some results back from some blood work. And the doctor who I was seeing went into this very alarmist kind of thing and wanted me to go for all these follow-ups and all this, like, see a specialist and whatever. And you know I have another doctor I go to, and she looked at the results and she said, well, if normal, let's say on this blood work, let's say you're normal, with the normal range is, they always do a scale, so let's say the normal range is 10 to 30. Okay. And she said, you're a 9. So she said, it's not like you're so low that it's like normal's 10 to 30 and you're a 1.
Right.
You're a 9. I mean, and so the doctor called me back, and she's like, oh, well, we want to give you the name of, the specialist. And I said, it's okay. I'm going to wait for a while. Like, I'm just going to see what happens. Like, I'm not in a rush. Like, I really don't think it's anything.
Right.
But I was kind of like, and I'm not telling everybody out there, I don't like to, I'm not spreading medical information. I'm not telling you what to do with whatever results you get back. This was just a personal decision. I looked at it and I thought to myself, I really don't think I have to worry. Like, and even, my other doctor said, well, if you go back and it's even lower, it hasn't changed, maybe you want to look into it. But here are some things you could do in the interim that might help.
Yep.
And that's what I'm focused on. But it was that kind of thing where, like, how much do we sit there and, one is get curious, two is kind of ask ourselves how we feel, and then and I really like this idea of, like, what you mentioned earlier is practicing, is like, how much time do we spend there? And that is even with other people and not with ourselves, is how much do we work on, let's say, those communication skills with someone. I think I've mentioned before, but when I listened to the podcast with Alain Debatin on communication and connection and a few others, they talk about the fact that we assume that people know how we feel. I mean, we think it's obvious, and sometimes it is. Like, if I'm upset, I wear my emotions on my face and people will say, oh, what's up? I'm not good at hiding it. But in general, how many of us walk around with, like, and we figure that somebody's going to figure out or should know how we feel. And really the only way they're going to know how you feel is if you share how you feel.
So there are some gateways I think that you need to go through along the way as well, in
Uh-huh.
our culture especially, because either animating and amplifying, something that's going on, or being in denial about whether or not anybody else cares about it. So why bring it up? That sort of thing. Uh, but there's this whole level of honesty that's just really, really necessary that most people don't think is important, and it's actually the access to intimacy. It's the access to really being genuine in both directions at the same time. Because the three things we've got is we've got consonance, and that's where we've got at least agreement. That there's some we're in the neighborhood. Okay, then we have dissonance, and we know that we don't agree, and then we have resonance, and that's not only do we agree, but we don't have a choice. It's actually felt, in measurable ways. It's like, for instance, two-stringed instruments. You can take a guitar that's tuned, to an E, and then you can put a violin on the other side of the room, and when you pluck that E on the guitar, it'll make the E on the violin vibrate. Okay, so that's resonant.
I love that explanation. Thank you. I love that.
Yeah, consonance is, well, maybe we may have some more to talk about here. I think we're not going to be killing each other in the near future, but dissonance means you better duck.
Right. But I love that idea of what resonance is,
Yeah.
because I talk about heart resonance all the time,
Yes.
and that's the synchronization of heart waves.
And
And and you'll get it with animals, and you'll get it with people. Um, and interestingly enough, like from the Heart Math Institute, which is the place where they've studied, I think, heart resonance. For those listeners, go out and check out the Heart Math Institute because it's a pretty amazing place. But I just loved the work they did with animals, where they actually, one of the directors, I think it was the director, um, had his son come in with their black lab, and they were first separated, and they hooked them up to EKG machines, and they then sent the boy in and didn't let the boy touch the dog. So the boy's sitting, like, they had no physical contact, and they just told him to send loving energy to the dog. And their heart waves started to match. There was no physical contact at all. And then when the boy left, there was some change in the dog's heart rhythm. And they said that was kind of like the pre or the very beginnings of separation anxiety, of them being separated. But just the fact that there was no physical contact, that they were just in the same room,
yeah,
and he was sending love to the dog. And I thought, how amazing is that? And, makes me, it really did. I think after I listened to, there's a few great YouTube videos where they talk about it. And I've looked at I have a friend who's really into heart math. And so, and is a trained heart math practitioner. So I think that's what it's called. I'm not sure if that's what it's called, but it's like certified through them. Um, but I just thought to myself, like, if we could go into a meeting or a place and just send kindness. I mean, I say love, but people have a hard time with love. So I'm just saying, just send good energy, send positivity, send um, kindness to other people. Like, you don't have to call it love if that's a hard word for you, even though, you and I, Bill, will say, I love you, like, or we'll tell the audience we love them,
only
but
because it's true.
only because it's true. But some people have that kind of that hang up about that. So just think of sending something else, whatever it is, positive.
I've got it. We can downgrade it a little bit. Same kind of vibe. I really like you.
Yeah, right, exactly. I really like
I mean, that's actually pretty cool in and of itself.
right. And so if you were to go into the spaces that you're in with just that energy,
Right.
what would that feel like? And what would that do to change the whole energy in the room?
Yes. Transformational. In my
Transformation.
in my personal experience, it's transformational.
And it is, you know, and I think you see it when you go in, and even when you have like you're standing online, and you know, I'll sit there and say, I'm going to stand opposite that cashier person, and I'm just going to send them positivity or whatever, and see what happens. Like, see whether they all of a sudden they notice you, or they like acknowledge you, or uh, you know, send gratitude to them because they're, you know, they're helping you.
Yeah, it's called gamifying, you know? When you can take some situation that's causing anxiety or some emotion that you're not really a fan of,
Hmm.
so you can this is where that honesty in terms of being able to listen to yourself and be able to identify truthfully, yeah, no, I don't really feel like I like this person very much right at the moment. And then you'll have another conversation with yourself silently about, well, that kind of doesn't line up with who I say I am. So what do I want to do about that? Well, the next thing out of my mouth typically will be, you know what? I really like you. You know, and the first time I say it, it's almost like I'm hoping not to get my head handed back to me. But 99 out of 100 times, I get a smile back, you know, and it's like, I like you too. Or find something that's an authentic compliment for the other person. Like, your hair looks especially great today. And I don't know what you did that's different. I kind of have an idea, but I really love what you did with it, and it's really a nice presentation on you, or something. But it's got to be genuine and real.
Well,
Um,
I'll tell you a funny story. So I'm in Trader Joe's, and I pull into the parking lot, and there's a woman sitting in the car next to me, and she has her visor down with her mirror, and she's like putting on her makeup, and she's doing all these things or whatever. And I'm kind of smiling to myself. And I thought to myself, so I just waited. I went around to the driver's side because she's in the driver's side. I go over to the driver's side, and I didn't want to startle her. She never window open, so I didn't want to knock on the glass. But eventually, like after a few seconds, she turned and looked. And I just she rolled down her window, and I just said, I want to tell you, you look wonderful. And she just let out the, she's like, thank you so much. It was so funny. It was like,
yeah,
I just waited. It was kind of, I could tell that she was concerned by her appearance.
yeah,
I guess the way she was putting on her makeup. I was like, you look wonderful. She's like, thank you so much. It was just like, okay. Took about 5 seconds, but it was the best. Like, it made me feel really good that I had like made her feel really good.
yeah. Yeah, it's again being awake, aware, honest, having all of this kind of relationship present, having all of that going on, you know, and a couple of times, really interesting things like going through a Walmart um, parking lot and having this woman struggle, you know, with what she's trying to get to her car, like there's something wrong with the shopping cart, you know, and she finally gets over to her car. You know, it's in an uncomfortable, painful amount of time that we're talking about here. Like, there's now 3 or 4 cars behind me, and I pull over right next to her. I put the window down, and I said, you know, it was a real pleasure giving you cover while you got that stuff to your car. And you should have seen the reaction from this woman. You would have thought that I told her that she had won the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes or something. It was just such a great moment between two strangers.
Hmm. No, I love those kinds of stories because I think you realize that, you know, because we all know, we've all been there, and we all know what's going through their mind. Like, oh my gosh, these people are going to kill me because I'm holding them up, and you know, and whatever. And then all of a sudden, you're like, oh, okay, thank you, appreciate you. Um, you're saying that, and now I can, you know, I don't feel so bad, and now I realize. I think it also makes everyone feel um united, because there's this feeling of like, oh, I'm not the only one. I was talking about that the other day because I was on a an audio event with my two friends. Have an audio event on Saturdays, which I love, and we were talking about, you know, they were talking about blame and, you know, shame, like that whole idea of, you know, shame and what kind of breaks that that the whole idea of shame. And one of the articles, and I should get the quote because the quote was great. I should take a moment. But it was something that if you want to break shame, you have to give people a safe space to um where they can basically where they can be honest and they can share so they can
Yeah.
communicate. Like that's what you need because basically what happens is you realize that if you've gone through this, then everybody, like somebody else has gone through it, which is what you did for this woman. You know, it's like you sat there and she all of a sudden said, "Oh, everybody's had a cart that wouldn't cooperate." Through the years and their long history of shopping, you know, when no matter where it is, where you get that cart where the wheel doesn't work and
Yeah.
you're fighting with it or whatever. So everybody, and they're like, oh, okay, I'm not the only one in the world that's had this happen, which is a feeling that we all have at one point or another. And sometimes in very trivial situations and then sometimes really big situations.
Yeah, and oftentimes the people that you encounter, they're not generous about it at all. I mean, you can read their lips, and they're calling you a jerk or worse, you know. But it really takes sometimes some discipline to have an initial reaction and then say, now wait a minute, that's not my best self, you know. I don't even know if I can conjure up my best self right now, but let's see if I can conjure up a different self, you know.
Yourself, right? Right. Some form of a better self. Let's see if
Yeah.
we can do that. Some form of a better self.
That immediate self was going to leave us both feeling less than we were before we met. So,
Right, right, right. Not to say that that doesn't happen sometimes because we're all human beings. Um, but but
sadly, we
sadly,
are.
but you know, also to work and say, oh, okay, you know, next time I'll do better, or you know, to realize that's what it was and be
Well, that's
able
another
to.
Ken quote that comes to mind. This being human beings things, we kind of suck at it, you know. And you know what? It lightens things up a little bit if you kind of realize that, you know, gee whiz, especially with what we've all been through in the last 10 or 15 years, our thoughts are usually not beyond our skin. They're usually deep inside on something else. I guess it's just statistic that I recall is something like 94% of the time, you're either thinking about something that didn't work in the past or something that's probably not going to work in the future. And very little time is actually spent breathing and getting where you are and appreciating the smells at the Walmart parking lot.
I was just looking for the quote that she said, just because I thought it was so good. Um, but I'll take if I find it.
You
I'm
keep
not.
looking. I wanted to also kind of amplify something else that you said about one side being favored more than the other. I find that in my yoga, workouts as well. And essentially, I do chair yoga because I really got myself out of shape over COVID. And not that there's anything terribly different about it. It's just that it kind of honors the fact that some of my muscles are just not in that great a shape. And how I find that out is doing things like standing next to the chair, lifting up my left leg and putting my foot on the inside of my knee of my right leg while I'm holding on with my left hand to the bottom of uh, the top of the chair while I'm doing a half namaste, and then switch to the other side after a minute or so. And no, not the same kind of balance, not the same kind of strength. When I first started, especially very, very iffy. But I'm at the point where I've been doing this now for a month and a half, and so it's routine. And that's the thing about language. That's the thing about caring about people. That's the thing about using training wheels. When you can't say I love you, say I like you, or
Mhm.
I think I might like you. You can just toss it out there a little bit at a time.
No, I love that. I got a book of poetry recently, and it used the word training wheels, and that's what made me think of it. It's actually called, the title is If the Heart Had Training Wheels. And I actually love that training. I love that by Ellen Everett, I think is her name. But I love the title. But I think that, I mean, I teach a lot of chair yoga, and because and just because my workshops all lately are chair yoga for the yoga part, just because I have a number of people who come who have a number of physical issues, and it's not about getting on the ground necessarily.
Right.
It's about being able to move and breathe. And so, and as people, whatever's going on, whether that be an age related thing or injury for some reason, my goal was never that yoga should be limited, to getting on the floor, to especially when I taught my chair classes. I mean, now I taught last week, and it's more that somebody told me I should call it Rejuvenate 101, because one of the the elderly people, because I do a lot of different things. I do tapping, and I do all this different stuff, but it's all about at least moving and breathing and healing in general, or energy. And so this woman comes up to me because I did some sort of brain kind of stimulating work. And she said to me, I'm 100 years old. And this little woman who was in a wheelchair, and she's like, maybe this will help, because I used to be able to do puzzles and I can't do them so easily anymore and everything. And so I was just like, but she was so cute. And she was just, I thought to myself, at 100, and she's still coming to class.
Wow.
And so it's just an inspiration. Doesn't matter your level. I mean, obviously she was coming in a wheelchair, so it wasn't like she was adorable.
Well, since you said that, you kind of called forth a memory from the 1990s, when I went through a landmark education forum. And in that particular group of people, there was a woman who was 96 years old. And each of us got to declare, what we wanted in our life that wasn't present. And she said, I have a son who's 78 years old, and I would really like to be a better mother. I mean, seriously? In a world where you can wish for anything that you want to, even at that age, the first thing on her mind and out of her mouth was, I would just like to be a better mother.
Well, it's like, I don't know it's like when you read about people who are, who get degrees at whatever college degrees or some sort of degrees at 80 something or 90 something, or who, still do, you'll read about people who do unbelievable, physical feats, like do a marathon or something well
Right.
into their, or maybe it's nothing as, or maybe it's just taking up something that you've never done before, or maybe it is saying, okay, well, I really want a better relationship with this person.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I have not done a good job this far, and I have to do better at that. And not in a critical way, but in a way that's, I don't know, more to the effect like, I don't want to, I don't want to leave this realm. I don't know, whatever you believe, this physical body, without at least knowing that I put in my all toward this. Like, that's how I look at it,
Yes.
especially, if I'm going to be a better friend because for whatever reason, in certain circumstances with certain people, it's like, let me fix that now. I think, because the last thing I want is to be, I think these images on the deathbed where you have regrets, and say, I should have done that differently, or I should have been better at that, been a better friend, or I should have been a better spouse or sibling or whatever.
It's at the level of not only having a genuine honesty, but having a sense of responsibility and commitment to causing something that really is in the area of language you don't have at the moment. And that's the hardest thing for people to do, is to own up to, at whatever age you are, I just don't have it in me right now. And I feel like I could, and I don't know the first thing to do about it. Those are I can work with those kind of people all day long. I mean, I love that.
Well, I agree because I think that, when you talked about in the beginning about being, in science being closed, we thinking that, and the fact that if you think that if there's no space or no room for, like, scientific evolution, so meaning literally like the fact that that's really what science is. You learn something and then all of a sudden something comes up and you realize, oh my gosh, this is only a small part, or this really wasn't true unless this happened. And
Right.
then it just gets larger and larger. And I think that there is this base of flexibility and room or space for things to evolve or change. And I
Yes.
think that I also like working with people like that because I think they have the ability to sit there and say, well, I don't know everything. I probably know very little.
Yes.
I probably know very little. But, and I have a friend who said that they like to go into every meeting thinking to themselves, that they probably, like, every Zoom meeting, and thinking to themselves that they probably know the least of everybody on that meeting. Like
Right.
you know, and I now go into a lot of my meetings like that because I think it makes you much more receptive to getting like learning from people and everything. Where if you go in thinking you know everything, there's no space.
I completely agree with you. And I also think that the time that's spent patting yourself on the back for when you actually knew something are moments of your life you'll never get back. You know, you're not present any longer. And so the whole idea that I can always learn something every single time somebody opens their mouth up, and then train yourself to listen past what they look like, or listen past who they are in your experience, or listen for the gold in what they're telling you that you really can't ever accept, that is real, the truth. It's painful, it's like at that level. But once it's not painful anymore, it's now something that you can own for yourself. You can now add it and upgrade that. Your model can get upgraded to the current year.
Right. Well, it was interesting because one of the practices, and I'll do this at the conference that I know you're going to, that Kate Mollison is offering, and on Grief Awareness Day, and I'm going to do this, and that is this whole idea of taking a moment, like mirror work, where you actually look in the mirror
Yes.
and for a period of time, and or you look at someone else without saying anything, and this whole idea of what you can see beyond the surface of their features, or their obvious outward appearance, and also your own obvious outward appearance if you do it with a mirror. Is, what you start to look at, and usually it's the eyes. The eyes are like really are windows to the soul, and usually it's the eyes that reveal a lot about a person or about yourself. But it's just such an interesting practice to be able to sit there and because the features of someone's face, the color of their skin, their age tends to dissolve away, and you literally start to look beyond the surface of someone.
Well,
I offer,
it's
I'll make that like my challenge for everybody for the week is they should go out and do that.
so it's remarkable that you mentioned that. That was one of the exercises that we did in a thing called the advanced course. It's called a be with, and that's where we sat in these chairs really too close to each other, face to face, facing each other for 10 full minutes,
Minutes, right?
and no conversation, no verbalization. And in a room of 60 or 70 people, some people were crying, other people were laughing almost hysterically. There was something going on inside of them that was brought up through this exercise. And the thoughts that they were having, thinking that they were thoughts that were being generated by the person that they were looking at, and maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But the point is, being that intimate with somebody, especially if they're a stranger, and going for 10 minutes without being able to utter a single word, it's an experience. I think that I would like to try the one with the mirror.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to be doing that when in my session when I speak for the conference, because it is a really, and we had to do it in yoga when I did my yoga teacher training.
Sure.
And part of it, that, the purpose that I want to do it is because I think we learn there is a element of feeling very uncomfortable.
Yes.
One is we're not used to being quiet. We feel the need to fill space with something. We're not used to being silent with someone else.
Right.
And there is a certain comfortableness in being able to be, silent with someone and not feeling like you have to fill space with words. Like that is a level of intimacy, like you said. So not being able to do that can feel very uncomfortable. And I think I want to partly do it because I think that when someone's going through very extreme emotional things, like let's say we're talking about, grief in more business and business like settings, there is that real uncomfortableness, is like you're not sure what to say and what not to say. And is this like the uncomfortable is like, is this person going to break down and start to cry in front of me? Like, and what do I do? Like all these things. And it's really about getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, of being able to be uncomfortable, and even looking at yourself in the mirror. It's like, how often we don't really sit there and look at ourselves for, except to see like, oh my gosh, like I need to trim my beard, or I need to like, oh my gosh, I don't look too good today. I look really tired, or, you know, my hair doesn't look good. Like we look at all the external stuff, but we don't really look at ourselves.
Yeah. But
Some.
by the way, I actually love the way your beard looks. You don't
Thank
change it.
you, thank you, thank you. I love beards, and that was like, my father always knew it, because when my father was really, really sick, at the end, like I'd go up and I'd touch his beard, and he said to me, he just looked at me and said, "You really like my beard, don't you?" And I said, "I love your beard, Daddy."
That's funny. That's funny. So I got one final thing to share, and then I'll let you take us home. Okay.
Okay.
Jan and I went out for a Sunday brunch, first class at the Simsbury Inn. I'm going to plug it, the Evergreen Room at the Simsbury Inn. And when we first got there, I excused myself and went to the restroom. But when I came back outside of the restroom, there was this woman. I'm guessing that she was probably from one of the islands, but she was not very tall, and she had the most beautiful, beautiful, deep chocolate complexions with perfect skin and everything. And as she's walking by me, she said, "I'm not in my." I think she was one of the gals that was turned rooms over and what have you. But as she's walking by, she goes, my, that is quite a beard." And then she goes, she goes, "Can I?" I said, "Can you what?" It was too late. She already was stroking my beard, and she goes, "That is so soft." And I said, "Yeah, you like that? I grew it just for you." So then she starts walking away. I said, "No, you got to come back here. We're going to take a selfie because I want people to know that you and I fell in love instantly just walking past each other." And she said, "That's good. So I'm going to send you a copy of that picture afterwards, Jan. And the rest of you folks at home, I just want you to think about one of the nicest, most wonderful smiles you've ever seen in another human being. And I want you to take that to heart, because that's who this woman was for me."
That I love that story. But just to go out with the beard, like, so my father is, and then at one point he referred to his beard as his fur. And it just always made me, I guess maybe because of my love for animals, think of it, so I was just like, you really like my fur. And I'm Dad, I love your fur. But for everybody out there, thanks for joining us today. And if you have any comments or questions, feel free. We'd love to connect with you. I know Bill and I love these conversations.
So if you'll just tell them who we are, then we can wish them.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I'm Jan Jeremias, and I'm here with the wonderful Bill Correll.
And we are lighting the candle.
A world that works.
Yes, we are. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode as well as the rest of the network at exvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.